We are 2 full weeks into the season, which means it's time to reassess some teams. Were there any teams that were better than we thought? Any teams that were not quite as good as we thought? And should we reassess any of their players for fantasy purposes as a result? I've got Lauren Auerbach on the line to answer that question here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Hello and welcome everybody to the Thursday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Vivid Seats. Erik Halterman here, and my guest today, Lauren Auerbach of Fantrax. And Lauren, we are 2 weeks into the season, which means it's time to reassess everything we thought about everyone and everything in the entire world. I think mostly want to remember what we thought over the offseason, but it's time to take a second look at things. How are your fantasy teams doing? Do you think you need to take a second look at every player in the league, or were you pretty much right throughout draft season?
Oh, I don't think anyone was pretty much right throughout the whole draft season. And I think once you add like injuries on top of that, it's just, I think especially over this past week, injuries have hit really hard. So it's like in terms of, trying to fill those holes, it can be challenging, but I'm doing like okay, like in my drafts. It's just, it's too soon. I don't tend to kind of freak out, after, a 10 or 14 games, kind of sample size. So I'm fine right now with my teams and my draft process.
It's too soon unless you're winning, in which case then it's not too soon, and you should absolutely already feel very good, like you're just set for the next 6 months.
Yeah. Like I knew what I was doing. I'm good to go.
Exactly. But for everyone else, we've got a whole bunch of players we're going to be taking a look at, a whole bunch of teams, really. We're going to take a look at pretty much all the teams that are doing notably better than we thought and notably worse. Because you know what? When teams do better or worse, it's usually because some of their players are doing better or worse than expected. And we have to figure out how much of it is real and who should we be picking up, who should we be considered dropping, etc. We'll get to that in a minute, but I want to start with the headlines. The first of which is going to tease our main topic of the day. Kyren Paris, he did it again last night. What was it? 2 more home runs for him. Currently, actually, the Angels are up 10-1 on the Rays. We will indeed be talking about them as one of our hot starters. They're starting even hotter, and I believe he does not have a home run. So Kyren Paris going a full day without a home run. Is he broken?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Kyren Paris is, you can't talk about the Angels right now without talking about, Kyren Paris. I mean, I think he has 5 home runs and 4 stolen bases after 10 games or something like that. So He is kind of the hot ticket right now, I think, not only for the Angels, but across, all of kind of the fantasy baseball world right now.
Yeah. And so what do you make of him specifically, but also I want to generalize a bit beyond him, because there are so many different factors with him that push in different directions as to whether or not we should buy in. I mean, the positive is that, like you said, he's not just been good, he's been outstanding. 5 homers, 4 steals. Other positives are he's still young. He's just 23 years old. And there was the talk of the offseason swing change. He worked with Aaron Judge's swing coach. That seems like a pretty good idea. So we can talk ourselves into that. But then on the other hand, if you look at his minor league numbers, they're not really close to good. This isn't really a player who was, decent in the minors and in the early time of the majors. I mean, he wasn't terrible in the minors, but there were real negative signs. The strikeout rate was awful in the minors and awful in the majors as well. And I don't know if you can disprove negatives that strong in 10 games. But of course, he's already been picked up everywhere, because in those high stakes leagues, if you don't grab him right away, somebody else already did. How do you make that decision? How do you talk yourself into buying in at the price it's going to cost on a guy who's shown us something this good, but it's this out of nowhere?
Yeah, he's one of these guys where I think at this point in the season, if you have, I'll look at some of my bench guys or guys like fringy guys. And if I don't really like kind of what I'm seeing, even if it's like really early in the season, I don't have a problem kind of taking a flyer on someone like Kyren Paris. But I think when you do that with these guys, like you said, you kind of have to do it with your eyes open. Like you said, that his strikeout rate has been terrible so far throughout the majors. Now this year he's got a 20% strikeout rate and he's walking at a 13% clip, which is good. But also if you dig a little bit under the hood, he also has a 17% swinging strike rate. So, the strikeouts will probably go up. And I think for me, one of the things when you see these hot starts and you're trying to decipher whether it's like a fluke or a fact or, what's going to work. I like, things like, okay, making like a new batting approach or a swing approach. He's not Aaron Judge, but I think that working with, Aaron Judge's hitting and swing coach, if that's something that is sticking, it's working right now. Fine. Like I'll go with that. Like when guys make kind of actual approach changes or swing changes, I like to see that and I'll buy in a little bit more. I think of course now it's like, okay, well, how he's, for him now it's adjustment period, right? Once pitchers kind of get the book out on like what is working for him and not, that's where I think we'll start to see, okay, was he going to kind of, is it going to go kind of south for him? Or can he hold his own? Will these swing changes be enough? And like I said, I think if you have a kind of a fringy player on your draft or on your roster, I don't have a problem taking a flyer on something like, Kyren Paris. Just be aware of kind of what's there.
What about, so in some of those shallower leagues, those are the people who are making the decision this week. The big NFBC pickup weekend for Kyren Paris was mostly this last weekend. But I noticed in Yahoo, for example, he has just recently shot up past 50% ownership. He's chasing 2/3 by the time this episode's done. He could well be at 3/4 the way his season is going. So opportunities to pick him up even there are increasingly small. But in those shallower leagues, would you drop, say, someone like Cam Smith, who was all the talk in a similar kind of way just, 2-3 weeks ago during draft season? I think it made a lot of sense to draft Cam Smith and say, hey, is there anything there? Is it already time to move on? Is that a good way to play fantasy baseball, to draft Cam Smith and then dump him for Kyren Paris on April 10th?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's very much league dependent, but I think one of the things that when you're talking about shallower leagues, I kind of don't really have a problem with that because you have such a deeper kind of replacement pool. And in terms of, say, dropping, Cam Smith for a Kyren Paris, yes, I would do that. I think right now you see Cam Smith really struggling. I think he's got like a 30 or 35 or 40% strikeout rate right now. And, I think with Cam Smith, he made that jump. He didn't spend a lot of time in the minors. And I think he went directly from AA up into, he played his way on the opening roster. And it just hasn't worked out well. He looks like someone who needs more seasoning. And so I would make that switch. And I think I don't have a problem just kind of seeing, now is the time to kind of take some flyers if your, roster permits it. And if you, like I said, if you've got some of these fringy guys who maybe have lost playing time, or those are the guys that I would target right now in terms of if I'm picking up, who am I dropping? Like, don't drop core players for some of these guys that I think we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. But you probably do have someone who is worse than what Kyren Paris might be. So it probably is time to make that move if you still have the chance. Let's move on to some of the injuries to talk about. We've got a handful of pitchers who went down the last couple of days. Justin Steele hit the IL with elbow tendonitis. And man, a pitcher being placed on the IL with an elbow injury, that doesn't sound good. But the latest news is that Steele believes he will only require a minimum 15-day stay. So obviously, I'm pretty sure that takes all talk of dropping him already off the table or something like that. I don't know how much I believe this, but you're holding on just in case. In terms of impacts to the rest of the Cubs rotation, how do you see this playing out? More chance for Ben Brown to come around, perhaps?
Yeah, I think so. And I think also, if there's one thing, we should learn from Dr. Dave at this point is you never trust the players and you never trust teams about what they say in terms of if they are being optimistic. Right. And I think that, with Justin Steele, it's a blow to, the Cubs rotation. But I think, you kind of keep him on just to kind of get more information, see what happens. and kind of go from there. But I don't think you should be dropping him immediately, at least in like 15 teamers. Yeah, I mean, it opens the door to Ben Brown. I don't know do you know who's getting called up? I didn't see if they had replaced.
I did not yet see the corresponding move. I can look that up.
But yeah, I mean, the Cubs pitchers so far, have been, okay. I think that the team is just firing on all cylinders offensively. And I think that between, Shota Imanaga, Matthew Boyd's been doing well. Yeah. And like you said, Ben Brown and Jameson Taillon, I think, I think they'll get like more leash, but, we'll kind of see. I think that they can kind of cover any kind of pitching losses right now due to their bats at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It was Ethan Roberts, who I would expect to work in relief, who got called up to take Steele's spot in the roster. Would expect Colin Ray to move in to the rotation, at least temporarily. Maybe Javier Assad in a couple weeks. Nothing too exciting, but maybe some options for deep NL leagues. Another pitcher who just went down with an injury, Zach Eflin, a lat strain in his case. Would imagine this is probably more than a minimum length stay because he's being shut down from throwing for at least 1 week. That means that in shallower leagues, maybe you're having to make a tough call here because Zach Eflin's not that exciting, probably holding on in deeper leagues. Any opportunities in this Baltimore rotation for anybody interesting to break through? And they're already down to some of their less appealing options to start the season.
Yeah, I think they kind of have a ho-hum rotation, but I think if there's one guy right now, it's Cade Povich. And I think that he was called up, I believe, for Grayson Rodriguez, I think. And, Povich's, surface stats, don't look great. He has a 6.10 ERA, but that comes with a 3.18 Sierra, and he has a 20.8 K minus walk strikeout minus walk rate. And so that's good. And I think that there isn't a lot of upside in this rotation. I think it's one of the things that is kind of holding this Orioles team back is the rotation in particular. So I don't know. I would say, let's look and see what happens with Cade Povich moving forward.
Yeah, it's time for the Orioles to accelerate that deadline day Sandy Alcantara acquisition. Move that up to mid-April, something like that. Seems very necessary. We might talk a little bit of Orioles soon when we get to the cold starts. I'm also going to move most of our injured hitters into the later portion of today's show because they happen to pretty much all be on teams who are starting out hot or cold. One more pitcher injury, though, to talk about before we move on to the main topic. Pablo Lopez has been placed on the IL with a hamstring strain, a grade 1 right hamstring strain. So I would imagine not a very long absence there, probably only going to miss him for a few weeks. But it looks like it's not going to be Zebby Matthews, who many people liked in this Twins rotation. It will instead be David Festa, who, to be fair, many people liked David Festa as well. He's expected to start Friday versus Detroit. So for NFBC style leagues, you'll have the opportunity to see that start and then pick him up on Sunday. But for daily moves leagues, any interest in picking up David Festa now ahead of that Friday start? I believe you're muted.
Sorry, I'm mute. I think, like we were saying, I think now's the time to kind of try, see what some of these younger arms can have, because I think that there's a lot of pitching opportunities like at the back end of rotations and guys who are coming up, and they're always worth a shot because a handful of these guys stick. And I think that if you have, kind of the bench room to do it, you should do it. And I think that both David Festa and Zebby Matthews are guys that I think even in shallower leagues, pick it up if your team can handle it and just see what happens.
Yeah, I would agree with that. This early part of the season, especially, your bench exists, I think, to give you extra room to stash mostly starting pitchers who could be the ones. And by the midpoint of the year, maybe you'll need to throw some more hitters on there to cover injuries. But really, in the early part of the season, if you can find room for as many potentially interesting starting pitchers as you can, definitely want to do it. Let's move on to the main topic of today's show. And like I said, there are some hitter injuries that you might be wondering why we didn't talk about them. We'll get to them soon. There is one that affects the first team on today's list when we're talking about the hot starts, the Los Angeles Angels, who are sitting 7-4 at the moment, but just checking the score, it looks like it's still 10-1 over the Rays. So I imagine the Angels will be moving to 8-4 soon. I'm going to give you their change in the playoff odds according to Fangraphs too, just because it's interesting to me how far these teams have moved in 2 weeks. The Angels only moved from 9.5 to 13.7%. So the algorithm's not overly convinced with the Angels' hot start. But we've already talked about Kyren Paris, how there's certainly at least something there, enough that everybody wants to be adding him already. Is there anything else on this Angels team that makes you think, wait a second, we weren't thinking about this guy? I understand why the Angels are performing better than they thought.
I don't know about in terms of, here's like a really surprising guy. I mean, I think right now the guy, you've got Paris leading the team. I think he's tied in homers with Logan O'Hoppe, and we know that Logan O'Hoppe has power that also, comes with, high strikeout rate. But, even guys like Mike Trout, who typically is, on that per game play is really good. He and kind of veteran Jorge Soler, they're doing well. The one thing that kind of stands out just in general with this Angels team is that, they're fourth in home runs, as a team, which kind of surprised me. They have 18 on the year, and it's mostly, through kind of the bats of the guys that I talked about. And I think that is one thing that I think has been very surprising about, this lineup is the power.
Yeah, 5 homers for Paris. And I guess if he went to Aaron Judge's swing coach, then we'll buy into some power. Again, with Paris in the minors, it was severe contact issues that were the main problem, and medium power. Mm-hmm. He wasn't somebody who had big power and big and swing and miss, the kind of player you would think, wait a second, if he just cuts down on that swing and miss, the sky's the limit. It was more medium power, so we're not sure how real it is, but hey, you throw in anybody linked to Aaron Judge, maybe. O'Hoppe was somebody who had his fans, certainly. Interesting to see that he's got 5 homers and also just terrible strikeout to walk numbers. Mm-hmm. 37% strikeout rate with a 3% walk rate. I don't know how that's going to continue. Taylor Ward has done terribly despite the Angels' hot start. And also, pretty much the entire Angels pitching staff has been really bad. The Angels, as a team, have been worth negative 0.4 pitching WAR. There's very little is going right here, except for Kyle Hendricks with a 1.64 ERA. I would imagine we're not buying into a late career Kyle Hendricks renaissance.
Well, I think we kind of know Kyle Hendricks at this point. I mean, he's, like you said. I mean, this rotation just hasn't really done it so far. And with Kyle Hendricks kind of as your best arm and probably most likely overperforming, as much as I said, I was surprised by, the homers that the Angels kind of have been hitting. It's on their pitching side. They're second to worst in the league in terms of giving up those home runs as well. They've got the 1.88 home run per 9. So across their starting rotation. So, that's a problem. And, I really I think Kikuchi, in general, I think when you're looking at, kind of 2 or 3 starts, I don't put a lot of weight in really awful performances unless there is something that, underlying metrics are just hey, red alert, maybe there's some injury, underlying injury or something like that. But it's guys aren't pitching at their peak right now. And a lot of pitchers, I think that across the league, it's been a very kind of mixed bag start to the season for a lot of these guys. And that goes with, Kikuchi and Soriano. He's got great stuff, but, he has, some control issues. And so I don't know, I tend to give pitchers a little bit of a longer leash in terms of kind of giving up on them. And we're kind of in that zone right now where I think you still have to kind of give some of these guys who have, a longer track record, some credit.
Yeah, Kikuchi was a pitcher I targeted pretty heavily this draft season based on his excellent strike on walk numbers last year. So to see the Angels doing well and to see him off to a poor start, a bit of a disappointment for my teams. Also, Joe Adell was somebody I thought would be completely capable as a fine, 23rd round pick. He's been awful so far this year. 0 homers, 0 steals. Although I think he might have actually gotten, did he finally get up? He hit 2 homers today. So scratch that. We're still so early in the season that you can turn your season around like that, which is a good point to make here. None of these teams are anything close to set in stone. But We should also mention Mike Trout hasn't even been amazing, despite the Angels being off to a good start. Although, again, how many homers did he hit today? It looks like he got 2, so scratch that as well. Heading into today's game, though, Mike Trout only a 106 WRC+. So very weird start to the season for the Angels. I think my point here is a lot of their best players aren't doing that well, and yet they're about to go 8-4.
Mm-hmm.
So to sum this all up for the Angels, are you buying them more than the Fangraphs playoff odds are buying them? Which, again, only a 13.7% chance at the playoffs for the Angels. Do you think there's enough here with Kyren Paris, with Jose Soriano, who did have a very good outing today? Is there enough there that you buy them as more than a pretty long shot?
Nah, I think they are pretty much a long shot. Although I do think that Soler has some, that park plays well for his power, and you will get some of these guys kind of popping off. But no, I don't think that that the Angels are are really going to be changing any odds at this point. I could be wrong, but yeah.
Fair enough. We like Kyren Paris enough, but the rest of the Angels still not fully convinced. One more thing, they're not running that much. This was the final point I wanted to make here. The reason why Angels were quite interesting as sleepers is they ran like mad last year.
Yeah.
They've only stolen 7 bases heading into today's games. That was tied for 20th in the league, so something to watch there as well. Let's move on, though, to another AL West team off to a hot start. The Texas Rangers, sitting 9-4, the best record in the American League. They have improved their playoff odds on Fangraphs from 51.5% to 66.5%. Texas Rangers are a team who, obviously, 2 years ago were excellent. They won the World Series. I'd say that's pretty good. Last year, missed the playoffs. So we shouldn't be too surprised, though, to see a team get back to as good they were just 2 years ago. Do you see anybody on the Rangers that you're buying as driving this hot start and, convincing you that actually the Rangers are for real?
I think that the Rangers are for real, just in general. I think that they just had like a really kind of poor, 2024, and I kind of fully expect a bounce back just in general. I mean, they do get dinged a little bit. Wyatt Langford just landed on the IL, I believe, with an oblique strain, so that's concerning because I think that he was. He was a top grab in drafts this season with his power and speed. I am surprised that guys like Jake Berger, he's still been fairly cold. But I think that this is a team that has a lot of oomph in their bats, and I think that they'll be a solid team.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot here, but that Wyatt Langford injury could be pretty significant. I'm looking at the team's hitters sorted by most plate appearances, and among the top 7, Corey Seager has the second best WRC+, and he's only at 105. Most of the Rangers' most used hitters are off to slow starts, except for Wyatt Langford. He's at 154, but as you mentioned, just hit the IL with a strained oblique. And I think it's a pretty significant one, right? Because Wyatt Langford also missed some time with an oblique in spring. He was able to come back and make it to the opening day roster. But I think this is a reminder that even if a guy makes it back, and even if he looks good for the first 2 weeks, and Langford's looked great, a spring injury is not necessarily something you ever 100% get past. So I'm pretty worried about Langford the rest of the way. I wonder if this might be a fairly lengthy absence that affects him the rest of the year. Do you think that's fair?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the thing is, with oblique injuries, even if you kind of have just a grade 1, those linger. And I think that it's just something as part of the job. You swing a bat, it affects your oblique. And I think that if you're starting from day 1, having aggravations, or you're not 100%, then that's going to linger, and it could easily get worse.
Yeah. How about on the pitching side? This is where the Rangers have done pretty well, and they have to, given that the offense, again, their most used hitters have not gotten off to a good start, yet the team leads the whole AL. Their starters, almost all of them, have been excellent. A 2.29 ERA for Nathan Eovaldi, a 1.32 ERA for Tyler Mahle, a 3.38 ERA for Jacob deGrom, a 0.90 ERA for Jack Leiter. Kumar Rocker, though, has struggled to 7.88, and Patrick Corbin was poor in his one start. Of course, health questions are very serious here for the Rangers, and we might have to get a whole lot more Kumar Rocker than the Rangers are ready for at this point. But are we buying into those first four at least? Do you think Tyler Mahle, now that he's healthy, for example, if he's good, that changes the outlook of this Rangers rotation?
Yeah, we'll see. I think that that 132 ERA, that comes with a 457 Sierra. So I think that he's probably pitching a little bit above his skis there. But like you said, Nate Eovaldi has been awesome, and Nate, I think Nate, friends, we're good friends. Nate,
yeah.
He generally he's always, I feel like, a little underrated, but he's always one of those guys that when he plays, he gets injured, but when he plays, he's really good. And he had that what did he have, the first complete game shutout, I believe, of the season.
Right.
And I think that that's exciting. And so I think that I'm rolling with Eovaldi. I like him. Jack Leiter, I think that he is on the IL with, I think it's a minor, it's like a blister, right?
Yeah.
And I think in the off season between him and Kumar Rocker, those were kind of like, okay, who's it going to be? And Leiter, at least in his first start, he's pretty well. He pitched pretty well. So I'm excited about him. And yeah, I don't know. We'll kind of see about Mahle. I'm a little bit skeptical about Mahle, but the other two guys I think are good. And they brought in Patrick Corbin, and Patrick Corbin should never be like near anyone's roster.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Surprised to see him get another MLB look for sure. I think
Right.
I guess he makes sense on the Rangers organization because it's a roster that you would expect to be dealing with some injuries, and they already are.
Yeah.
But would not be looking to him as a streamer. Real quick before we leave the Rangers, Jacob deGrom is off to a good start, but with the velocity deliberately down a bit, he's not striking out nearly as many batters. Through his first two starts, just a 20% strikeout rate. What are your thoughts on Jacob deGrom through two starts? Is he still Jacob deGrom?
Well, I don't think he's like, I guess he's kind of a tough one because it's like I said, I think you're still kind of early, in the season. And yes, those like you said, that velocity's down, the strikeouts are down. But I don't know. I feel like it's just two starts. I tend to kind of, like I said, kind of give pitchers a little bit longer of a rope. And he certainly has, I think he kind of, warrants kind of a longer leash in terms of like, okay, this Jacob deGrom, like I'm still in on Jacob deGrom. I still think that he is kind of Jacob deGrom. Let's just like I don't think we should throw him out after like two starts.
Yeah, certainly. And the results have been fine, not giving up too many runs, just was shocked to see his strikeout rate below average. And if that does continue for more than two starts, and we're still looking at a 20-something%, a low 20s after 4 or 5, that'll be a little bit weird. But like you said, give them a couple more outings there. So to the Rangers, do we buy them over or under that 67.5% playoff odds that Fangraphs has given them?
I think that's probably about right. But if I had to go, if I had leaned one, I would maybe get a little over. I like them.
Yeah, fair enough. A lot of young talent. It would just take a lot of injuries striking that rotation, I think, for them to suddenly look like they were in trouble. And it could certainly happen, but it's no guarantee. Let's jump over to the NL for a bit here. We've got a couple teams in the NL West who are doing better than the Los Angeles Dodgers. If you had that on your predictions for April 10th, congratulations. The leaders of the NL West, the San Diego Padres, whose playoff odds, according to Fangraphs, have jumped from 32.9% all the way up to 49% after their 10-3 start. However, right after their very hot start, they suddenly were hit with injuries to basically all of their key players at once. Jackson Merrill, he hit the IL earlier this week with a hamstring issue. Fernando Tatis is dealing with shoulder discomfort, not yet anything more than day-to-day, but for somebody who had shoulder surgery just a couple years ago. We even have Jake Cronenworth is dealing with something as well. He's day-to-day with a rib issue. So particularly on Tatis there, just how worrisome is a shoulder scare, shoulder discomfort for a guy who got the surgery a couple years ago, but, has that past history of shoulder troubles.
Well, I think it is disturbing. I think, I think again, he's had this, I think, a couple of years ago with both of his shoulders, and I think that to kind of see that, um, again, is not good. It's something you don't want to see, and especially for your star player who has had problems kind of staying on the field. It would be a big blow if this turns out to be something very serious.
Yeah, so I don't know what we can do about it. Everybody who drafted him is kind of stuck at this point. I mean, if you've got him in a league with trades, you don't want to trade him now, right after this
Mm.
happens. But, maybe if he comes back in a day or two and looks good for a week or two, you might want to consider it just in case there's a longer IL absence later in the year. But among the healthy Padres, they've got plenty of players playing well, some better than expected. Manny Machado is off to an excellent start, a 158 WRC plus there. Xander Bogaerts looks to be bouncing back. He's at a 120 WRC plus, hitting 304. Gavin Sheets even is looking useful enough as a large side platoon bat. He's got a 116 WRC plus, just one homer, but a few at least marginally interesting Padres. Are you buying Xander Bogaerts in particular? I think that's one of the big ones because he really fell off, and if he's good again, suddenly this lineup is a lot longer.
Yeah, I think I've kind of always been a fan of Bogarts, and I think that I feel like he wasn't really getting a lot of love in drafts this offseason. But when he came back at the tail end of 2024, he looked really good, and I think that he's like also someone who has like a really long track record of being a productive player, and so I'm not too concerned about Bogarts, and he's got 3 steals on the season, which is good. But yeah, I'm a fan. I'm a fan.
Yeah, I ended up with him on a number of teams, so I'm happy with how his first couple weeks are going as well. Over on the pitching side, there was thought to be some closer competition potentially here, or a potential trade for Robert Suarez, which would have opened up a competition. Instead, though, Suarez has 6 shutout innings to start the year and 6 saves, so everything looks pretty good there. And then in the rotation, I'm curious if you are starting to rethink any of these players. The best ERAs on the Padres rotation belong to Randy Vasquez at 172 and Nick Pivetta at 270. Meanwhile, Michael King's okay at 405 and Dylan Cease off to a terrible start, at least ERA wise, 798. Are you rethinking any of these guys in either direction?
Well, I think Dylan Cease has been fairly unlucky. I still think that I love Michael King. I love Dylan Cease at the top of this lineup. Again, it's a couple of starts, and when you kind of look at their ERAs and kind of their expected stats, that they've just had they just had kind of had bad luck. So I do like these guys. I didn't really have much on Randy Vasquez, honestly. So I think that, while the other guys may be kind of a mixed bag of a start, him doing, performing well is great. But again, I think that he's also probably overperforming there. But I think in general, this rotation has looked pretty poor. But again, we're at 2 starts, and I think that this is a rotation that can turn things around.
Yeah, I didn't even mention Kyle Hart and his 11-12 ERA. And speaking of Randy Vasquez, he has twice as many walks as strikeouts. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I trust his ERA to remain under 2.
Yeah.
On the other hand, though, Dylan Cease, his ERA estimators still look pretty good. So I don't think I'm too worried. So on the whole, a lot of promising bits with this Padres roster in general, but the injuries are coming. So are we going to say over under that 49% playoff odds from Fangraphs?
Uh, I think I may go under. I really am concerned about some of the injuries, and I think that even though they're off, the Padres are off to a hot start. I think that not to take the shine off of them, but their first 2 series, were against Atlanta and the Guardians, and I think that with if some of these I think injuries on the offensive side, kind of are a little bit more serious, I'm a little bit concerned. So I'd go under, I think.
Yeah, fair enough. I think under guarding against the possibility that, if Fernando Tatis were to miss a month or two, suddenly this team's outlook looks pretty different. But let's talk about their NL West rivals. No, not the Dodgers. They are not off to a surprising hot start. They're off to a normal good start there, so we don't need to talk about them today. Instead, the San Francisco Giants, sitting 9-3, they have increased their playoff odds from 28.5% all the way to 47.9%, according to Fangraphs. The Giants, their big offseason acquisition, Willy Adames, is hitting 184 with a 37 WRC plus, yet the team is off to quite a strong start. Jung-Hoo Lee, Wilmer Flores, Mike Yastrzemski, all doing very, very well to start this season. You buying into any of those three guys?
Yeah, I was kind of a big fan of Jung-Hoo Lee in the offseason. I think that he was someone who was a little bit underrated, and I think he plays a little bit better in 15-team leagues, but I think you can still have him in 12 leagues. He's leading the league in extra base hits this year, and he kind of profiles as a little bit of kind of a Kwan-esque with maybe a little bit more power, and so I really like him. And Wilmer Flores, and I think Mike Yastrzemski. I mean, these are guys who are just kind of working right now. This team is gelling, and I think, the run production on this team kind of stands out. Everyone for the most part is chipping in, and I think that both Flores and Yastrzemski make for really good kind of plays in 15-team leagues, or if you need fillers somewhere. I think that, it's well worth kind of, putting a couple bucks down on these guys to kind of get their services.
Yeah, and that's one of the points I want to make in today's episode, is that if some of these teams are better than we thought, then the marginal guys who are just part of the lineup on a regular basis, if that whole lineup is a little bit better than we thought, then a Mike Yastrzemski, if he's suddenly surrounded by decent teammates and plays against every righty and performs well enough, that's a better player than somebody who is surrounded by pretty poor teammates and plays fairly often, etc.
Yep.
So I would agree. I'm a little bit more into those guys than I thought I would be. Over on the pitching side for the Giants, interesting to see that two of the saves have gone to Camilo Doval, although the rest of his numbers don't look that great there. Not sure if he's that interesting of a pickup alongside Ryan Walker, but it's the rotation that has really been quite strong, and it's probably the main reason why the Giants are off to this start. Well, not Justin Verlander. He's got a 6.92 ERA, although his ERA estimators are fine. But Landon Roop, 3.60. Robbie Ray, 3.18. Jordan Hicks, 2.38. And Logan Webb, 1.89. Those are their ERAs so far. I'd imagine people buy into Logan Webb, not at the 1.89 level, but as a frontline starter, certainly. But what about the rest of those guys? Ray, Hicks, and Roop. Anybody there stand out as somebody who you think is going to be better than expected for the rest of the year?
I mean, I've been surprised, with Roop, and he's a player that looks like he's underperforming. His estimators are a little bit below kind of his 3.60 or 3.60, ERA. And so I like him. Robbie Ray right now, he's just so unpredictable, and he just, again, it's two starts, but I'm a little dicey about Robbie Ray. And Jordan Hicks, I think that he's a streamer, I think, at best right now, but I think if you're going to play him, you want to play him now, because he kind of gives me, I'm a little bit nervous about some guys that are making that shift from the bullpen, into the starting rotation. And I think that he's someone who kind of early on in the season, if you want to take advantage of some good matchups, then, maybe, but, it's really, like you said, I think, Webb and Roop in particular, I think, who have shined so far. And, like you had mentioned, I mean, this rotation, I think, is surprisingly playing well. They have a 3.49 Sierra as a team, which is third best, and a 16.7 strikeout minus walk rate, which is top 6. So they're working. And then, like we talked about the bats, everyone's just kind of producing on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, even Justin Verlander, who I mentioned, had that 6.92 ERA, a 26% strikeout rate, slightly too high. Walk rate, though, 10%, but his ERA estimator's sitting in the threes, even around
Mhm.
360s, some of them. So throw in that very nice pitcher's park in San Francisco as well. I think there's going to be a lot of very usable starts from this rotation. I'm with you on Jordan Hicks early in the year, certainly. I think go at him now. I don't know what's going to happen in the second half, but I think he's useful now. So a lot of fairly interesting players on this Giants team. Are we going to go over that 47.9% playoff odds? Or if we went under the Padres, who are right around the same mark, does that mean the Giants are going to take the spot or no? I think we lost you again briefly there.
I would say no. I think I wouldn't go so far as to say over.
Okay.
Yeah.
We still call them close to a coin flip and probably slightly
Sure.
below, but
Yeah.
an encouraging start. Should we jump back to the AL here for one more AL team? The Toronto Blue Jays. Now their 8-5 start doesn't necessarily stand out that much. There were some people who were Blue Jays fans, and their playoff odds have only moved up from 43.6 to 50.4, but they are the first team in the AL East as of right now, the best division in the league, I would say. Every single team in that division, I wouldn't be surprised if they were at the top of it through 2 weeks. And suddenly there's some positivity in Toronto between the good start and the Vlad Jr. extension. This was the team that I thought would be rebuilding by the middle of the year with Vlad Jr. and Bo Bichette on the way out and with not quite enough coming up behind them. But the best team in the AL East, is there any chance that this sticks around? Have you seen anybody on this Blue Jays roster who you are reassessing through 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize until a couple of days ago that they were leading the AL East. So it was kind of surprising. And then, I also wouldn't have put kind of on my bingo card after, 13 games, that George Springer and Andre Jimenez were kind of putting this team on their backs, and that Jimenez basically leads the team in home runs. I think so. That's surprising. Another thing that's surprising is, Anthony Santander is, he's ice cold, right now. He doesn't have a home run. And I think that really what stands out is he only has a 2.9% barrel rate, and he's hitting, a bunch of ground balls and his zone contacts down. So I think that Santander is someone who, definitely, he has a pedigree to, hit 35 plus home runs. But I am surprised that he, hasn't really kind of got going at this point. But yeah, I mean, I didn't realize this team was at the top of the league. So it is exciting, I think, for them, and they've also done really well on their pitching side too. So
Yeah, we will get to that pitching in a moment. Just want to mention they've hit 6 homers as a team, 3 of them to Andres Jimenez, 2 to George Springer, and 1 to backup catcher Tyler Heineman. That leaves 0 for Anthony Santander, 0 for the $500 million man, Vlad Jr., and 0 for Bo Bichette.
mhm.
Although, should also note, Bo Bichette has a single-digit strikeout rate this season, just 9.8%. The numbers aren't totally there, but it's at least an above-average WRC plus at 110, and he's hitting 291. Were you pro or anti Bo Bichette heading into the season, and how would you assess his performance through 2 weeks?
I was kind of like about Bichette. I was like, well, if he kind of fell, I have no problem with him, but he certainly wasn't a target of mine. So I think that he is better than kind of, I think he's a little bit better than what he's playing at right now, but I think he's fine. He just wasn't a target of mine.
All right, fair enough. Anybody who did land Bo Bichette can be happy enough with his first 2 weeks.
Mhm.
But let's talk about the pitching side for the Blue Jays. As Uncle Ted mentions in the chat, they are pitching their butts off right now. That rotation looks quite good outside of Jose Barrios. He's at 4.58 ERA. But Bowden Francis, 3.18. Kevin Gausman, 2.33. Chris Bassett, 0.71. And then Easton Lucas, who I can't say I knew a whole lot about or a whole little about prior to him filling in for Max Scherzer. He's got a 0.00 ERA through 2 starts. If the Blue Jays are much better than expected, I'm pretty sure this is the reason why. So you buying into any of these hot starts? Do you think any of these guys were significantly underdrafted? Of course, it's a team that's got Max Scherzer ready to come back at some point, and he only made 3 innings into his debut before going down and being replaced by apparently the much better Easton Lucas. So there's potentially a really strong rotation here. You buying it?
I kind of am. I didn't, again, when I hadn't realized that they were doing so well. And then I was looking, when you dig a little bit deeper, especially at this rotation, Chris Bassett I'm kind of happy that he's gotten off to this great start. And I think that, he's coming off of a down year. And so it's good to kind of see him kind of rebound. And he has such, a long track record of just kind of an innings eater. He's not a flashy guy, but, he'll get the job done, and to see him doing well, I think is great. But yeah, Easton Lucas, I think you kind of write him off as just kind of a placeholder for Max Scherzer. But even his ERA estimators, they're still looking good. They're the highest is his xFIP, and that's at a 3.02, and he's done really well so far, and he has a 184 xERA and a 21.1 strikeout minus walk rate. And I think the important thing to kind of keep in mind with Easton Lucas, though, is that the sample size is so small. I think he's got like a combined just over 17 major league innings across the last 2 seasons. So we just kind of all need to keep that in mind. But, looking at some of his, kind of pitch offerings, he does have, 4 of his pitches, generated at least a 25 or greater whiff rate on all 4 of his pitches. So that's good. I think that he's someone I think definitely you need to be putting on your watch list. And certainly in 15 teamers, I think, and then looking at his schedule, he gets Baltimore and Seattle coming up. And I don't know. I like I said, I think he's definitely a watch list guy, and maybe even pick him up just to see where this goes in deeper leagues.
Yeah, Lucas is a 28-year-old who, as you mentioned, only threw about 18 innings in the majors prior to this year, all as a reliever with an ERA north of 9 and a WHIP north of 2. Not ordinarily the type of player I would think we'd be talking about this early in the season, but 2 excellent starts. In the Blue Jays, of course, they got a late career or, late 20s breakout of sorts from Bowden Francis just last year. So this wouldn't be completely out of nowhere. Interested to see where this is going for Easton Lucas. So are we willing to take the over on their 50.4% playoff odds, according to Fangraphs, in the toughest division in the league?
I'm going to say yes. I'm just going to go with it.
All
I'm
right.
going to say yes. I like what the Blue Jays are doing. And yeah, and I was also going to say, I think with the rotation, everyone's been really great at limiting free passes. So they have a really low whip rate in general as that rotation, and they've just been humming. And so I know it's very early, but I like to see like teams, doing well kind of on both sides of the ball like this. So.
All right. I don't know if I'm convinced. I don't know if I can quite get there because the division's so tough, but I would like to. We had a question in the chat here from a name that I can't totally pronounce, but asking about 2 pitchers that we just talked about on these last 2 teams. Would you rather pick up Landon Roop or Easton Lucas?
Ooh. I would probably actually do Roop. I think he has a little bit of a stronger track record, and I'm still interested in both. But I think I would do Roop. I think.
Yeah, I think so. Given that Roop was in the rotation on opening day, easier for him to still be starting in May. Lucas, 2 bad starts, then he's the one who makes way when Max Scherzer comes back. Let's talk about one more team that's off to a hot start, and then we'll have time for just a couple cold starts at the end. But the Cubs are at 9-6. It's not that big of a surprise. Probably would have been predicted by many to most people to win the NL Central, and 9-6 is nothing crazy. But the Cubs, what is crazy is they have the best run differential in baseball so far. They have increased their playoff odds over at Fangraphs from 48.3% to 59.6%. And are we buying the Cubs? Have you seen anything there that says, yeah, actually this team should have the best run differential in baseball?
I mean, it's pretty wild how far ahead of, the Yankees are behind them, but they're a good, about 15 runs and RBI ahead of the Yankees. This is just a team that's firing on all cylinders, and pretty much everyone up and down this lineup, minus, maybe Matt Bush or or Shaw. And I think that no, I mean, just everyone is just working and just kind of killing it right now. So you can't go too wrong with the Cubs.
Yeah, certainly they were helped by playing that series in Sacramento. That'll help you put up some big numbers. And through 2 weeks, you just have a couple blowouts, and suddenly you are the top team in run differential. Ian Happ not off to a great start, but other than that, most of the Cubs' key players. Kyle Tucker's got a WRC plus north of 200 with twice as many walks as strikeouts. Seiya Suzuki off to an excellent start as well. Dansby Swanson hitting the ball well. Even Nico Horner off to a good start too. But Kyle Tucker for NL MVP, not AL anymore. He was traded, remember? Do you think he's doing it in his potentially 1 year in Chicago, trying to get a $600 million, $700 million contract? Is he gonna be the best player in baseball?
Maybe. I mean, I like to see it. I have just personally, I have tons of Tucker shares, and I think that there was a point like in the drafts where people were like, he's going to a new team. The wind blows in. Like this just isn't. I think he was getting faded a little bit. So I love personally to kind of see this, him doing so well. And sure, why not? I mean, like this is one of the most consistent, players in the league, and he has been for a while. So I don't see why that can't happen.
Over on the pitching side, this is where the Cubs don't necessarily look like they ought to have the best run differential in baseball. Well, it depends on who's starting. When Matthew Boyd's starting, he's got an ERA of 0. Shota Imanaga, 270. But then Justin Steele, 476, and now hurt. Jameson Taillon, 606. Ben Brown, 771. I guess we have to have a lot of faith in Imanaga and maybe Boyd. I mean, I like Matthew Boyd. I think I'm willing to say that he's probably going to be pretty good, but they're going to need something more in this rotation if they're really to be one of the better teams in the NL.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I like Boyd as well, but I think with Steele going down, this is just a lot of these guys also their ERA estimators are in the 4s, and I think that everything's going to have to be working right. And I think there has to also be some improvement moving forward. I think in order for this rotation to, I think make more of a contribution. But like I said, like earlier in the show, I think right now with the bats just being so loud on the offense, I think that that can maybe make up for some of the pitching deficiencies, but they're going to need that in order to, I think, to withstand a season and to have, what is that, like a 60%? What are the odds?
Yeah, 59.6%.
Yeah.
That's the final question here. Are we taking the over on that?
I'm not going to take the over on that, but I really like the strong start. But like I said, I think there are some glaring holes with the rotation.
I will lean the over just because that division is just not very good. I think the Brewers were the only other somewhat scary team, and they're dealing with so many injuries in the rotation already that I'm willing to say the Cubs in this division, I'll give them a 60 to 65% chance. Given the struggles in the rotation, though, I wouldn't put them there in any other division, I don't think. We're going to move on to a couple of the teams that started off cold to end the show here. But first, a message from Vivid Seats. Finally, baseball is back this MLB season. Knock it out of the park with Vivid Seats and score great tickets to the biggest games of the year. Every fastball, every home run, and every eye-popping play from your favorite team live and in person. Plus, with Vivid Seats Rewards, you earn rewards with every single purchase. Just buy 10 tickets, then cash in your credit toward your free 11th ticket. Talk about an easy win, and here's a pro reward tip. When buying tickets for your whole group, split the bill and make progress toward your free 11th ticket even faster. From behind the dugout to the upper deck, Vivid Seats has great tickets for all the 2025 games that matter to you. Just visit vividseats.com or download the app today. Vivid Seats, experience it live. See vividseats.com/rewards for terms and conditions. And welcome back to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Erik Halterman and Lauren Auerbach here, discussing some of the teams that started out hot. Let's quickly end the show here with a couple of the teams that started the year quite cold. And there's one team that stands out well above, or I guess below, the rest in this, and that's the Atlanta Braves, off to a 2-9 start. Now, I don't think anybody's surprised to see Atlanta start the year somewhat slow, because this is a team that's without the best pitcher in baseball, Spencer Strider, and a top 3 hitter in baseball when healthy in Ronald Acuna. Neither of those guys have been there through the first 2 weeks, so that takes off, a projected 12 WAR or something, whatever it is, from their roster. So certainly it shouldn't surprise us that the Braves didn't play at full strength to date. But 2-9, is this team actually worse than we thought?
I'm a Braves fan, and I am kind of concerned about the Braves. I think that they're not. I think they'll play better than they're playing right now, but I think to kind of what extent is really questionable. I think, I think it's important to remember that in 2024, they played really poorly from a run production standpoint. They only had 704 runs, which for that franchise that was the lowest amount of runs that they'd scored since 2016. And I think that in the offseason, everyone just assumed, well, hey, it's a bad year. Acuna, wasn't, providing much, and they'll just rebound. And I don't know that we should just be so quick to assume that they're just going to rebound to kind of previous heights. I think if you're going to look at this kind of glass half empty, I think is this start of 2025 just a continuation of their poor 2024? And I think that one thing that concerns me, I think that this back third of the lineup is bottom third of the lineup is pretty dicey, for the Braves. You've got Brian De La Cruz, Jared Kelenic, and Orlando Arcia. And I think that they have very little depth. And it's like, if someone goes down, I just think it's a questionable. And sure, I think that, kind of like on the pitching side, we're all waiting for Spencer Strider to come back. And I do actually like the Braves starting rotation a lot. But on the offense, I definitely have some concerns.
Yeah, Marcelo Ozuna and Matt Olson are off to fine enough starts. So more Ozuna than Olson. Olson's been an above average hitter, and he's walking more than he struck out. So I think he's going to be okay despite a 2.11 average. But every other regular has been well below average at the plate. Ozzie Albies with a 58 WRC plus, Michael Harris at 56, Jared Kelenic also at 56. I guess less of a surprise there, but still just as bad. Austin Riley, he's at least up at 81, but that's still well below average, and he's striking out 35% of the time, whereas, say, Albies is only striking out 12% of the time. So with Albies, that looks like a small sample slump to me. You could probably say the same for Harris, but Austin Riley is the one that worries me the most, looking at his just sudden inability to make contact. Did we just misdraft Austin Riley? Is he worse than the general public thought at this stage in his career?
I don't think so. I think, as much as I said, I'm kind of concerned about the Braves in general, I actually don't really have concerns about Austin Riley. I think that the strikeout issue is an issue. This is not, typical, Austin Riley, 35%. So I think that is a concern, but, kind of looking under the hood, looking at some of his underlying metrics, quality of contact, he's still, making solid quality of contact. I think he just may be pressing a little bit. He's not making as much contact, and but there's nothing like I'm not concerned about him. I think that he's one of the more consistent players in the league. And, he started off slow last season as well. So I don't know. I think that there's enough there, and the metrics are fine. I think, I don't know, I think maybe if he's just pressing and he's just, trying to generate stuff on a team that isn't generating a lot at the moment, like maybe that's what he's trying to do. So, but yeah, I actually don't have a problem with Riley, and I think that if you have him, you should wait him out. If you have the luxury of benching him, sure, you can bench him. He did hit a home run last night, so that's good. But yeah, I'm not too concerned about Riley.
All right, so not too worried about some of Atlanta's best hitters. They just don't quite have enough of the strong hitters at the moment. What about on the pitching side, where Spencer Schwellenbach has been incredible? He has yet to give up a run in 14 innings. There was somebody earlier in the show in the chat asking about trading him for Jackson Chourio. I mean, I'd rather have Chourio still, but
Yeah.
the fact that we're talking about Schwellenbach in those terms, I mean, I don't think it's crazy to at least think about it. Schwellenbach's looked like one of the best starters in baseball. Problem is, Grant Holmes is second among the starters with a 4 ERA, and everybody else through 2 or 3 starts is north of 5. Smith Shawver, 519. Chris Sale all the way up at 675. Reynaldo Lopez had 1 poor start, got hurt. Bryce Elder filled in for him, wasn't good either. So is this a team that has Spencer Schwellenbach and nothing? I mean, surely Chris Sale at least should turn around, but what about the rest of the guys?
Yeah, no, I think it, Holmes is, I have a fair amount of shares of Holmes. And so he's just giving up too many walks right now. Um, and I think that he has, he played against the Dodgers. He was okay last night. But I think that he's just giving up too many free passes. But I think that obviously it's like, I want to be like, oh, well, when Spencer Strider comes back, it's not going to erase everything. But I do like this concept of like, Strider, Sale, Schwellenbach, Holmes. I think you need to give him a little bit more time. But yeah, he's walking way too much, and we'll see. I mean, I still like the rotation, but I don't know. I'm concerned about the Braves a little bit.
Yeah. So sounds like from an Atlanta fan, there's real concern. I mean, there could have been even more concern, though. There were enough players who you were not totally freaking out about yet. But we'll take a look at their playoff odds according to Fangraphs. They came into the year with 93.4% chance, already down to 65.9 after 2 weeks. Although on the other hand, still a 65.9% chance for a team that's sitting 2-9 is pretty remarkable. You going over or under that?
I'll go over the 65. Like I said, I think they're going to play better than what they are now. I don't know how high it will be, but this is a team with a solid track record. So,
yeah, fair enough. I think a lot of it's going to come down to, do Acuna and Strider hit the ground running, and do they stay on the field the rest of the year? And we don't know either of those things yet. I think I noticed that the Braves have worse playoff odds than the Mets, but better World Series odds. So the bookmakers still thinking that if Atlanta does make the playoffs, well, they'll have Strider and Acuna by then, and they'll still be one of the best teams in the league. And I don't totally disagree with that, but given the really poor start and the very tough division, well, at least 2 teams that are quite good, I don't know if I'd go much over. So I don't know, maybe a slight under for me there.
okay.
Because again, you give it another 1 or 2 bad weeks, then suddenly Atlanta's thinking about selling at the deadline. I mean, we're getting dangerously close to the time at which they have to reconsider their season. I don't think we're there yet, though.
Fair point.
We got time for 1, maybe 2 more cold starts. I think the Orioles are the main one I want to talk about here. They're just 5-8 to start the year. That's dropped their playoff odds from 45% to 36.7%. I was shocked that they came into the year with only 45% according to Fangraphs, but I think they didn't add nearly enough to their roster. I think that was the general consensus. And in the early going, they're looking like they're not as good as they wanted to be. Are you reassessing the Orioles or any particular players on the Orioles after their slow start? It's mostly the pitching that's been the problem, right?
That's the thing. I was going to say, I think, so far I think they're fine offensively. I mean, they're kind of middle of the pack to higher middle of the pack in a lot of run production numbers, and they have a 105 WRC plus. They're fine. They're okay. But yeah, I think the problem is the pitching. And I think when you rattle off names like Charlie Morton, Dean Kramer, Tomoyuki Shigano, and Kate Povich, Eflin just went on the IL. You've got Grayson Rodriguez on the IL. It's just, I think this was, something that in the offseason, people were disappointed that this team, kind of just got Charlie Morton, they didn't make a bigger splash on the pitching front. And I think that while I said, I think that, Cade Povich is kind of interesting in terms of, an upside arm here. None of those pitchers really kind of does it for you. Right. And I think, I think this is a problem, and I don't know how well they can kind of string together, significant innings with these arms. And if they're just kind of like middle of the pack right now, offensively, it's going to be a problem. It has been a problem, with the rotation. So I'm concerned about, this was a problem off season and now it's showing up 14 games in.
Yeah, not good when things are playing out exactly the way you worry they might. I should mention it wasn't just Charlie Morton and Tomoyuki Sugano who they added over the offseason. They also added Kyle Gibson on a minor league
Yeah,
deal.
sorry.
And he's been working his way up at AAA. He just threw 4 innings in his last, or 3 1/3 in his last AAA start. Wouldn't be surprised if we see him get the call, maybe in a short outing to replace Zach Eflin. But I don't think that's going to change our opinion of the Orioles rotation.
No, that's a very much a lateral move. Like, it's just like, oh yeah, of course. It's like Kyle Gibson's like maybe the next man up, and I think that it infuriates fans, in the area. So
yeah, it's a problem. I think that using your hitters against the Orioles in most of their matchups looks like a pretty good idea. I mean, maybe I could see Cade Povich coming around due to some pretty good strikeout and walk numbers, but the rest of it, these are back-end starters trying to play for a really good team. At least all of the hitters, pretty much, the regulars have been good. I mean, Cedric Mullins has been great,
yeah,
shockingly, out of nowhere, so that's good to see. Gunnar Henderson has struggled in 6 games after missing the first week with an intercostal strain, but you'd imagine he would come around. Colton Cowser was bad through 4 games and got hurt, but most of the key bats here are okay. But what do we make of this team in a very, very tough division that has just a poor pitching staff to go along with a promising lineup? Their playoff odds, again, dropped to 36.7%. That feels so low given what the Orioles are supposed to be. Are you willing to take the over still?
Yeah, I think I will take the over on that, but I'm not, it sounds weird. Yes, I'll take the over, but I'm also not very optimistic if this kind of rotation, with this rotation, I guess, in general, because I don't know unless they I don't know who they're going to get, if they're going to, so I think if they're rolling with this rotation, this is a problem, but I think they are better than 36 or whatever percent.
Yeah, it just feels way too low. And I think, of course, the playoff odds, they're looking at the actual rosters as they stand. They're not projecting any trades. That tends to be beyond the capabilities of the algorithms here. There has to be a trade with Baltimore, even though that's been what we've been saying for over a year now, and it hasn't happened. They still have excess hitting talent in the minors, and they still have major holes in the rotation. If that trade happens soon, then certainly I would take them at more than 37%. So I'm going to still take the over there, but I am not very confident with how Baltimore's looking at the moment. I think we got time to talk about one more slow start. I've got a handful of teams who are starting slow-ish. Which stands out to you as deserving of a little bit of extra attention here?
The Twins have been like really slow, and
Yeah.
it's like looking at their bats. I was like, well, if Harrison Bader is kind of your best player, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
even though like we talked about that there is like for fantasy, there's a lot of outfielders who've gone down. And I think if you're in deeper leagues, you should pick up Harrison Bader because he is like producing right now. But I think what's disappointing about the Twins also is that, they're also someone who didn't make a lot of moves. I mean, they picked up Harrison Bader in the offseason, but they didn't make like a ton of moves. It tends to be kind of more of a cheaper team. And it's just so frustrating because, they've got, I think, I like their rotation a lot. They have such a good rotation. But now you've got, Pablo going on the IL. I think it's not supposed to be for a long stint because it's for a hamstring issue. But Joe Ryan finally looked good the other night. Bailey Ober hasn't had, a good start yet. And like we said, you've got some kind of promising arms in David Festa and Zebby Matthews, but it's just like right now, like the bats, nothing's going on, on offense.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those struggling bats and try to figure out if we should be thinking about any of them differently. I mean, Matt Wallner's still been good too. Ty France has been okay. Willie Castro's been okay. But beyond that, it's some of the key pieces here. Carlos Correa, a 44 WRC plus. Byron Buxton, the exact same mark. Trevor Larnach has struggled as well to a 66 WRC plus. But really, Buxton and Correa, or some of the players that were being drafted higher on this team, Were they overdrafted, or do you think this is just a slump?
I personally would never I don't draft like Buxton. Like he's just that history there is like, that injury history is too long there. But I tend to think that like players like, Correa will come around. Um, but there's not a lot here, I don't think. And to your point, there are only four players that are kind of in the starting order where that have above 100 WRC plus, and it's just between Jeffers, Julian, Carlos Correa, Buxton. Royce Lewis is on the IL, but there's nothing here that really pops out to me.
Yeah, unfortunately, Royce Lewis being on the AL would not be an example of something that would make us reconsider how we think about a player. Unfortunately, that's going exactly according to expectations. Just on Buxton, the thing with him is you draft him because you think he's going to be good on a per game basis, and then you might have to drop him in May or something. But he's been terrible. 16 strikeouts against just one walk. I mean, this is not good, because the fact that he's performing poorly doesn't make him any less likely to stay healthy. We could still get the injury in another 2 or 3 weeks, and you've had to deal with this for the first couple. And he's not young anymore, so I think it might be time. I think he's one of the players that I am already wondering if we should rethink whether or not he was actually a viable option.
Yeah, and I
he's
think
going to give you a good month. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think even if to your point, like you draft him for like when he's in the game, but it's like, are we though? Because he still is striking out like over a 30% rate for like the past 5 seasons, and stealing less. And I don't see a lot of. I understand why people do it, but I think we may be past that point.
Yeah, so the Twins, with a roster that has, in theory, decent depth, a lot of players who are in theory okay, and if they deploy them at the right points, they're good enough to win a bad division. It really has not looked like that this year. So are we going to take the under on what's now a 41% chance? Fangraphs had them at 55.5 heading into the year, 41.3 now. Does that still seem high? Does that seem low? I mean, remember, the division is still not good.
I think it kind of seems about right. I don't know. I don't have a lot of. I think I read somewhere where it was like I don't think they've won like back-to-back games for like a really long time. I don't since like the tail, like I think since like August of last season or something like that. I don't know if that's correct. I don't know. I think I'm going to say I think that's about right.
Yeah, I think fair enough. I guess the best reason to be optimistic about the Twins is their 6th and 7th starter, David Vesta and Zebby Matthews, are more interesting than most teams' 6th and 7th starters. We haven't seen either of them yet, and their 4th and 5th starter, Chris Paddock and Simeon Woods Richardson, both have ERAs north of Paddock has been bad, 14.73. Woods Richardson, 5.59, not good either. If we see Matthews and Festa soon, and if they live up to their promise, then I think we're talking about a rotation that's much better and a lineup that's okay, and a team that should be more than 50% likely to make it. So I'll lean slightly towards the over, but there has not been a lot here. But that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you very much, everybody in the comments, and thank you, Lauren. Where can people find you and your work?
Yeah, thanks for having me. You can find, my work over at Fantrax. So it's fantraxhq.com. I put out a couple articles each week. I do a risers and fallers piece. I also do a 2-start pitcher kind of write-up. And so if those are of interest to you, be sure to check that out, as well as some of the other great stuff over at Fantrax.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Lauren. And we will be back tomorrow, Clay and Todd, with 2-start pitchers here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Vivid Seats.